Every week, HR is expected to make expensive decisions with half the information and all the accountability, from benefits to workforce strategy. No pressure or anything. That's where Aon can step in and help. They help orgs across 120 countries cut through the noise with insights on health, retirement plans, total rewards, and AI, sharing data that gives leaders clarity instead of anxiety spirals. Aon exists to shape decisions for the better, so organizations can protect their people, grow their business, and stop pretending we'll figure it out later is a reliable strategy. Better data, better outcomes. That's Aon. This is Better Decisions, a special podcast series with Aon in partnership with I Hate It Here. I'm Hibba Yusuf, and from February through May, we're dropping one episode a month focused on one thing, the decisions leaders keep getting wrong and what it actually looks like to make better decisions. Here's the premise. Leadership is basically a never-ending decision factory, and too often, the decisions that shape how people work, their role, the skills, their future, get made off of fear, headlines, and whatever AI story might be blowing up on LinkedIn this week. So in this series, I'm interviewing experts and asking one question every single episode. The very last question I will ask: what's one decision leaders consistently get wrong in this space, and what would making a better decision look like? For this episode today, we're talking about AI and workforce strategy because we're in the middle of this genuine transformation and how work gets done. And a lot of organizations are making moves that look bold, but might actually be reactive. And I'm joined by Marinus to dig into what separates fear-based AI decisions from strategy-driven ones, what leaders actually are getting right about doing this differently, and why the biggest opportunity isn't about automating tasks, it's potentially about reimagining work itself. All right, let's talk about these decisions we need to stop making on autopilot. Marinus, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much, Heba. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I think you're absolutely spot on. I think there's certainly a lot of fear in this topic related to AI. I mean, and a lot of misconceptions about it as well, what AI can and cannot do. And I think with that lack of clarity, leaders are struggling to kind of distill signal from the noise. And that's what we do in our work. I'm a partner at Aon. I help to lead our workforce transformation team, and I serve as our AI growth leader. My background is in industrial and organizational psychology, so I'm really, really keen as a practitioner to lead with science and data, and to really tune into what that true signal is that leaders should be thinking about when they're making workforce decisions, and tune into a signal that is really evidence based rather than just opinion based. So yeah. I'm really, really looking forward to the conversation, and I'm sure you probably have a couple of hypotheses too about what leaders are getting right and wrong in the space. I'd love to hear those as well.
Yeah, and I can't wait to geek out with you because like my dream second life career might be to try to go get a master's or PhD in organizational psychology because that type of stuff just gets my brain going. I mean, I do this work all day long, and so I'm always like, who is writing about this? What are the new theories? Like what's going on at work? So I'm excited to just geek out with you for the next 45 minutes because AI has been the topic du jour. Like everyone is talking about AI. I can't go a
Yeah.
week without scrolling something and seeing something about AI. And I mean, it's forcing me to think really critically about my role and how my role could potentially change in the next year to 5 years. And so I want to really start there on these biggest trends. What are the biggest trends in AI/workforce innovation for just 2026?
I think that the first thing that comes to mind for me is in 2025, we were kind of still in this phase of experimenting and trying
Hmm.
things out and trying to figure out where we will go next. And the way that I've been thinking about 2026 is that 2026 will be the year of scaled adoption where organizations are really starting to think through, well, okay, what is this going to look like at scale when we starting to adopt AI? And with that change in the tone and tenor, I see what we're also seeing occurring more and more in the work that we're doing is that organizations are moving to a phase where AI is becoming an integral component of work, not just a productivity tool. And I would say up until now, a lot of organizations have used AI to kind of look at how to do work faster and
Hmm.
cheaper. For me, if you were to kind of like think about where that falls in the spectrum of value, that's really the shallow end of the pool.
Hmm.
And where it's really meaningful is to start thinking through, okay, well, what is work going to look like in the future? How can we do it differently? And that's where I think the conversation will evolve to in the next year or so. And in my mind, there's a lot of really cool analogs in the not too distant past, that we can refer to and learn some lessons about how technology actually changed work. So, if we were to think about kind of this continuum that is talked about, working faster and more efficiently versus creating value in a different way, we can think of something as simple as maybe just like the barcode. You know, we all see barcodes on products that we buy in the store. And what's really interesting about the barcode is how it got used in different ways by organizations. So some retail organizations use the barcode to simply streamline what the checkout counter looked like. And that was great. It made checking out a lot better and faster and more enjoyable for the customer. Certainly made the job easier for the cashier. No longer did they have to look at the price tag and say how many items were being bought and what the price was, and have to key that in. They could just scan the thing, and the customer can be on their way. And that was certainly valuable. But there are other organizations that use the barcode as a token against which information could be attached. And those organizations or those retailers, they were then able to use the barcode to fundamentally change how their businesses worked. They were able to then use the barcodes to start looking at inventory at scale, managing their inventory, proactively shaping their supply chains, and then making decisions at an enterprise level across all of their stores, across all of their suppliers, and then position their business for success in a better way than those retailers that just use it as a automation tool at the checkout counter. And what I think was interesting in that use case is that those organizations that use the barcode as a information tool are thriving today, whereas those that used the barcode as just a mere means to automate the checkout counter. Some of those are now just memories, for us. They live in a historical context as failed businesses. So it's the same
Hmm.
technology, but completely different outcomes. So maybe I'll pause there for a moment for any thoughts from your end.
That analogy is so good. I was just thinking about that because it barcodes did dramatically change like how we checked out at work, and we had to, and the experience itself changed. I think when we start talking about AI at work, I get kind of scared that it's been so long since we've dramatically changed things at work that people are just not going to react well to it. And it is interesting seeing all these articles about, oh, well, we'll learn new skills and maybe you'll have a completely different job. And I think we as human beings, I mean, you know this, like, I think we're scared of change. And so it's so interesting to me when you bring up that example because, yes, that did dramatically change the checkout experience. And so now my brain is spinning on what could work actually look like in the next few years because it's going to look dramatically different. But how are we going to get our people there? I think is my like big gray area. Like, how are we going to reshape those jobs and the skills in our workforce strategy to actually accommodate for AI changing the workplace?
I think you're spot on. We are at that moment in time again where work will fundamentally change. And I've heard this adage that jobs will never change as slowly ever again as they are today. So that like
Mm,
this pace of change is likely only going to increase as we move forward. And what I think is really fascinating about AI for me is that the value isn't just in automating tasks. The value will come from fundamentally redesigning what work is and how it's done, how it's coordinated, how jobs are defined, and even asking that hard question: should some jobs still exist in their current form, or should they evolve and be something qualitatively different? And if you start thinking about the structures that we have in HR and the things that HR leaders need to think about, we have historically had pretty static job descriptions, and those job descriptions have stayed the same for extended periods of time. But now with AI and this pace of change, those static job descriptions and the use of them is starting to break down. Work is becoming more modular, if you will.
Hmm.
It's more skill based and it's more fluid. And we continually have to ask ourselves, well, how are we creating value as employees, as workers, and as HR leaders? And how are we positioning our people to continue to create that value? And therefore, we need to start thinking about work in a completely different way. So, how can we help our employees build the skills that they need to have in order to excel in this new future? So maybe just to kind of come full circle here, the real value with AI is not just doing work faster. It is how are we going to evolve work itself, and how we as HR leaders are actually helping us to do that. So for HR leaders, it's not just about using AI tools. It is stepping into this world where we want to focus on AI as an enabler and create AI enabled workforce strategy to help understand what are those critical skills that our people need to have, breaking work into tasks, and being very explicit about what could potentially be automated and what could be augmented, or what
Yeah.
are the things that are newly created for folks to do in their jobs.
This is such an interesting conversation because I have to vent about something for 1 second because I just remember in 2020, like when in HR, everything just like fell to us. It was like, you figure out disease protocol, you figure
Yeah,
out what remote work, right? And now we're in this moment in AI, and it does feel like a lot of people are turning to their HR leaders. And at first, when all of this started, I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit resentful. I was like, yet another thing HR is the
right.
person responsible for, right? But as
Yeah,
we've gone further into the AI exploration, as you're even talking about how it's going to reshape work, I think to me that just solidifies HR's importance and significance so much more because we are the function that is going to figure out how the people and the work could potentially look completely different in the future. And that to me, actually, like when I reshaped my brain around it, it made me excited about the future. I was like,
yeah,
it wasn't just one more task to me. I was like, holy cow, to like redefine what my workplace looks like, to like be the person the employees can trust to help them figure out what skills they need to learn, how our work is changing, like how do we instill judgment and creativity in people, like all those things really excite me as a HR. So I've like kind of come full circle on the AI thing where at first I was really resentful and now I just have genuine excitement because everything that's potentially going to change is really within our scope and our realm. And I think
yeah.
for HR people, this is like such an opportunity.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you think about the work that we do in HR, we're in a very privileged spot in the organizations that we serve. And I can say that having been formerly a head of talent at a large packaged consumer goods organization, there is no other function that understands what work looks like across the organization more so than HR leaders do, or the HR function does. And then the other element that I think is really interesting in this space too. I was fortunate to attend um, uh, a large AI tour stop event that was sponsored by Microsoft. And as we've been collaborating with them, we've been able to participate in some very deep conversations with them, and shared client organizations, and then also listen in on conversations that they were hosting. And the key learning there for me has been that AI deployments as a technology tool, they either succeed or they fail at the human
Hmm.
layer. And we as HR leaders are the stewards and we are the shepherds of how our people adopt and use AI, and also how work gets reshaped as a consequence of AI being deployed in organizations. So yeah, again, I think we're in an incredible position as HR leaders to be able to lead our own organizations through this change, and probably more so than just about any other function in your organization.
Yeah, I love that. When everyone's like, HR needs to earn its seat at the table, I was like, my seat is cemented. It is literally at the table, not moving because
Yes.
everything is changing work and I need to be in that room every time to talk about it. It is interesting because like while we could lead it, we're not alone, right? We have our leaders
Yeah.
that also should be really thinking about it. So if AI is fundamentally changing like our people requirements of work, what do other leaders need to know now to get it right for their people and their businesses?
I think it's moving away from that binary mindset that it's the humans versus the AI.
Yep.
Um, we've all seen the Terminator movies. We've all seen the Battlestar
Too many times.
Galacticas and all the others, right? So,
Too many times.
um, so for me, it isn't just it's not AI versus people. It's people plus AI,
Mm,
or colleague or employee enabled AI, and whether that combination actually produces better outcomes, both for people and for organizations. And where I see organizations really struggle in this space is where they're bolting on AI to existing processes. And from my point of view, that almost always disappoints. Like it just doesn't quite work. And the better approach is to design workflows, assuming that AI is already a part of how work gets done. And for me, if just to come a little bit closer to your primary question, like what should leaders do differently? I think there's three things that leaders should be doing right now. The first one is getting a very clear picture of where AI is fitting into your organization or your company's value chain. Where does it give you better visibility or better coordination or better insight? And what higher value work could AI unlock for your people? So that's point number one. Point number two is really starting to think through about what are the skills that people actually need, not just the tools in order to do their work differently and better. And for me, AI isn't just about prompts. It's fundamentally about judgment, knowing what to ask for, how to interpret outputs, and then ultimately how to redesign work around all of these new capabilities that we're creating.
mhm.
And then the third one is to kind of think about the big picture. So redesign work end to end. And a lot of us are kind of drawn in by the simple argument of, oh gosh, well, we can create so much efficiency with AI. So it's not just about streamlining the tasks. It's more about thinking, well, what is possible? How could work fundamentally change as a consequence of AI? What new work is possible? And therefore, you can look in roles and ask things like, well, what should be automated? What should be augmented? And how should the work that people do evolve as a consequence of AI enabling them to do net new things? And then the last point, kind of an ancillary one that I'll mention here, is that culturally, all of this only works if people have permission to experiment. So
Yep.
therefore, leaders need to be able to stand up and say, we're using AI to elevate work, not just to cut costs, and then actually back that up in a very meaningful way.
If making people decisions lately feels like a guessing game with expensive consequences, welcome to everyone's nightmare. Aon helps organizations make better decisions about people, risk, and everything in between using actual data, not vibes, not gut feelings, real data. They call it the business of better decisions for a reason. It's time HR had better tools to work with. Yeah. Do you remember when, like, maybe it was like 2015 to like 2019 maybe, psychological safety was like the number one thing
Yeah.
everyone was talking about. And then it feels like it kind of tapered off with like remote work where you hear psychological safety, but like not as much as I feel like we were talking about it back then. As you were saying, like people need to have the freedom and time to experiment. I came right back to that psychological safety piece. Like if your employees do not feel psychologically safe, they're potentially not going to be curious or even want to experiment with AI.
I agree. I think if we're all thinking about AI as something that's going to take something from us, then naturally we'll operate from a fear-based point of view.
Yeah.
And I think for HR leaders, there's a lot to be done to take that fear away. So if we think about traditional talent management, we're thinking about managing things like performance, and
Mhm.
there are very clear metrics around what performance could look like. And it's also predicated. Talent management is predicated by this notion that, well, people will be in these same jobs for a long period of time. They'll climb the ladder. They'll go
Yeah.
from one to the next, one step to the next, or one rung to the next rung in the ladder. But what we typically don't do is we don't incentivize people to work themselves out of their own jobs. And if
No.
you think about that, it's like if you're taking this thing with AI to its logical conclusion, is like we're basically asking folks to generate efficiencies, and we are asking folks to engineer processes where they can fundamentally do something different. Now, as HR leaders, we need to create a space where that's safe to do, and we need to create that next destination for folks to go in the organization. Otherwise, it becomes a self-defeating exercise.
Yeah, that fear though is it's like everywhere. I feel like it has permeated every conversation I've had with people. As somebody who considers herself like somewhat fearless, I still feel this pressure and this like kind of scaredness about what the future could look like. Like how can HR and business leaders actually separate like fear-based decision about AI into like strategy ones, especially when I feel like all of us are under this pressure to keep up. Like my
Yeah.
CEO sends me a new Twitter thread every single week about a use case for HR. And I'm honestly like, I don't have time to keep up with all this. I have 8 to 10 hours of work to do a day. And my free time, I'm trying to live a life. But now I'm reading about AI on my weekends and my weeknights. Like, let's start there. Like, how can we
Yeah.
separate the fear based decisions from actually strategy driven ones?
Yeah, I think there's so much spin and there's so much keeping up with the Joneses, if you will, when it comes to
Yeah.
AI. And I think a lot of organizations feel like they're very far behind when the reality is everybody's just kind of getting to that first step on
Hmm.
the staircase. Some are a little bit closer. Maybe some have put their foot on that first step. Maybe some are getting ready to take the second step, but we're all kind of like there. And I think having comfortability with that is really important. Just acknowledging that this is a journey that's going to go on for the foreseeable future. And I think organizations that are acting out of fear, they tend to have rushed pilots. They'll go and select the tool, deploy the tool,
Oh,
and
yeah.
maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. And I think the thing to anchor to is not so much the tools, but it's the problems that we're hoping to solve. And I think we all can, if we just kind of buy ourselves a little bit of time, and we say, look, we're at a novel period in history here. Things are moving really, really fast, but um, let's make some sense of it. And you can go and say, okay, well, what are the problems that we need to anchor to? What are the opportunities that we have in our organizations? And then figure out how AI can slot into those opportunities. That will lead to a much more mindful approach on how to deploy AI, and it won't feel quite so harried and rushed and discombobulated as I think it is feeling in many organizations. So you can just kind of ask yourself this question: Are we being a strategy led organization? Do we have a business strategy for using AI, or are we using AI because it is a novel and interesting tool? And if you can say we are a strategy led organization where we're using AI as a tool to solve our business problems, I think you're definitely in a better space than when you're not. Now, the other element I think that's really critical here is that fear of the individual employee too, right?
Mm, yes.
So I think it's not just a leadership topic, but it's something that leaders can help with in organizations. And how leaders can help is communicating accurately and clearly, even when the future is a little bit muddled. I think in this case, honesty really, really does matter. One of the things that we shouldn't do is we shouldn't pretend that work and jobs won't change.
Hmm.
The fact of the matter is they will change.
Yeah.
And I think what we all know and can acknowledge here is that AI will make the proverbial pie bigger for everybody, whether it's for a company or for employees. But how that pie is going to be sliced is going to look a little different for everybody, and it's still a little bit unclear. So it's essential to kind of pair this honesty also with some clarity, by articulating this is what we're investing in, this is why we're doing it, these are the principles and the values that we're following as an organization, and this is how our people will be supported through this change. And then the other element that I'll just mention here is that concrete examples help. Stories beat slogans any day of the
Every,
week.
yeah.
Um, and and what I will say is that as organizations are embarking in this journey, there needs to be a two-way conversation where people have the space where they can ask questions. Again, like we talked about earlier, they can experiment, but importantly, relay their learnings back to decision makers in the organizations, rather than just being informed about all these AI decisions that's being made from the top down. and embedded in the organization. So I think there's so much richness that can be uncovered by engaging your employees in the journey rather than just taking it and making it a one-way street.
I love that. I always say the employee experience is a two-way street. Like every single conversation should be a back and forth, not just a here's the thing I believe and you should do what I want. And I've even told our employees, like, hey, just like all of you are exploring this new technology, I am exploring it as well. There are things I'm going to learn. There are things you are going to learn. The best thing that we can do is just continue to share with one another what we're learning in hopes that we all move forward to something better. And then the last thing I'll add when we were talking about fear-based was like thinking about the problems you're solving. Every time I start to feel myself get anxious about something or that I'm reacting out of fear, I always ground myself in the question, what problem am I trying to solve? And if I cannot articulate the problem that I'm trying to solve, I know I need to start there rather than be anxious and have a lot of fear about something. And it's something I've instilled in almost every team I've worked with. Like, just answer me the question. If you are coming to me with a solution, but you can't tell me the problem we're even trying to solve with this solution, we need to go back to what problem are we trying to solve? Otherwise, why are we doing this work? And so I think like anchoring in that can also be really helpful as you're being lobbed things left and right, AI this, AI that. Continue to
Right.
ask yourself, like, what is this problem I'm trying to solve? And then you can even go one step further as an HR leader and say, like, what is the impact to the company's revenue? Like, that's something I always like to tie it back to, like my company goals. If I'm solving a problem, what is it actually solving? Is it a people problem, an organizational problem, an actual business
Right.
problem? That type of stuff also helps ground leaders in the things that they're doing and why. Something I think that has helped me a lot in this space is that I am just a startup person. I've worked at 4 startups. I joke that I like love chaos. And so this new time with AI excites me because I'm like, oh, it's just as chaotic as working at a startup.
Yeah.
As you think about organizations that are seen as leading in this space, what do you think they are doing differently to become these like frontier organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's my response here will be a little bit of an extension of what I just shared. Organizations that are leading the way and truly like pushing the envelope when it comes to AI is they treat AI as a work and a business model question, not just a
Mm.
tech initiative. Um, they ask questions like if we had standardized real time insight into our operations or our workforce, how would we actually run our business completely differently? And for me, that's kind of the crux of it. And as I'm thinking about organizations that we work with, there are a couple of patterns to answering those questions that show up pretty consistently. So the first thing that these organizations do is they start thinking about standardizing how they describe work. Think about the tasks that people are doing in their jobs. Think about the skills that are required to do those tasks, and then collect them into roles or jobs. And then think about the outcomes that could potentially be achieved with AI, and then reshuffle things around in a meaningful way to then adopt AI. And this is a structure, kind of like the basic building blocks, if you will, that allows AI to scale in organizations. I think absent that level of clarity, it becomes really, really challenging and difficult to adopt AI in organizations. Then the next thing that organizations do, or kind of like this next pattern that shows up, is that organizations redesign the workflows and their entire structure and not just adopt new tools to do the same work in just a different way. They rethink where the work happens, who does the work,
Mm.
and also how decisions related to that work are being made across an organization. And I think that's really powerful because AI is a catalyst for change. It is a catalyst for reshuffling what work could look like. And then the third element here, and we've touched on this throughout our conversation today, is that they actively manage the human part of the equation by forming this very, very clear narrative, investing in skills in an ongoing way, and then also starting to think through, well, what could a career path look like when work is enabled more with AI? And then the through line for me through all of this is intentionality. These organizations that are leading the way and are true frontier firms, they decide up front what kind of an organization they want to be with AI supporting their mission. And then they align the technology, the processes, their workforce, and also their culture to that choice.
Do you see any businesses like by name that are doing this really well that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, there are a good many businesses that are doing this incredibly well. I probably won't share them by name. There are some retailers that are pushing the envelope in this. I think retail, by its very nature, is a sector that moves really fast. And as a consequence, there's a lot to be learned in retail. There are also some biopharma companies that are incredibly well resourced, and I think they have leadership that is highly creative, just given the work that they do. And they have done things like incent people to work themselves out of their jobs, and created that psychological safety where that can happen. Now, granted, that can't happen in every organization, but I think those are kind of like two sectoral examples where I've seen things work really, really well. And I also see other organizations that are being very intentional about how they are approaching their junior talent, and starting to think through, well, okay, we can create efficiencies, but how do we bring our junior talent along? How do we still continue to have a talent pipeline for the future? And being very intentional about the experiences that are being created for that junior talent, and then also how the work is being reshaped to optimally bring junior talent into organizations to position them for future success in AI enabled roles.
I love that. There's so many articles about how we've like the junior layer has been pretty decimated because of AI. And so I've been trying to find like really good examples of who is still investing in that because like people need jobs. Junior talent need jobs too,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's just been a really interesting time to watch and see what companies are doing. And I like to always keep a pulse check on like what's working and what's not. And so that was really helpful to like mention those two sectors. I'm definitely going to go do more research because I think we all have something to learn. And I wish more people were openly sharing what they're learning about AI. Like I feel like we're getting a kind of mix online where you only really hear success cases,
Yeah.
and so I'm really looking for people to also share failures because I'm like, that is how I learn best. I need to know how it went wrong so that I can maybe avoid that in the future. But that's not here nor there, maybe for another episode.
Yeah.
The through line question I'm asking everybody as part of the Better Decisions series is, what's one AI decision companies keep getting wrong? And what would a better decision look like?
I think it comes down to looking at AI as primarily a cost cutting lever. In a
That's
lot
what a
of
lot of
organizations.
companies are doing.
Exactly, and a lot of companies are actually backpedaling on that too. You can look at some great examples in the media where companies have made some bold claims about how AI is going to enable massive cost cutting opportunities, and then they set targets and they go after those targets, and then all of a sudden they come back and they say, well, that may have been a little bit aggressive. We need to rethink our stance here a little bit. And that could involve hiring folks back, or hiring different folks. So for me, that's probably the one thing that we keep getting wrong. It's a bit of a myopic perspective on the deployment of or the use of AI. And if we were to come back to that earlier barcode example that we had, if we think about cost cutting as like the key driver here, the barcode, referencing the barcode example, is kind of like it's the equivalent of automating one small part of the process and
Yeah.
never asking, what is the thing that that barcode could actually enable? So we need to start thinking through, well, how can we use AI to provide us with better intelligence and help us to coordinate our businesses better and do work in completely different and new ways? Instead of asking or saying things like, where can we start with headcount? The better question here is, what low value work can we remove? And how can we invest that capacity into higher value AI enabled work? So, how can we help people to elevate their craft,
Yeah.
and do more, with the tools that are at their disposal? And then I think at the individual level, again, the most powerful shift is moving from how can AI help me do my job faster to, if AI is now the new thing that I need to consider in my job, and this is the standard that I need to aspire to, what job actually makes sense both for me and for the company? And I think if we all ask those questions in a truthful way, we can create more value at the organizational level we can create more value at the individual level. And also, individual employees can be placed in that path to create value in a more effective way.
Yeah, that's amazing you were talking about that, and I was thinking about the answer for myself actually, because I was like, "Oh, that's so interesting." Because it watching us all just say, like, "Use AI," it just really upsets me because 'cause I'm like, people are anchoring on the you we're trying to cut costs, and I'm just trying to do my job faster, but I think when you
Mhm.
pull back the layer with those questions that you asked, we actually get to, like, a deeper, more fulfilling, and beautiful part of work, like where we can actually spend our time honing that craft, like you said, and not just executing on simple tasks. I think the last thing I will add plus one to all of that is I would encourage people to like actually document their work because I think the problem that a lot of people have is they're trying to use AI without actually documenting what their job is. Like, what is my day to day process for how to do this? Because then once you have it documented, you can actually use AI to ask, like, what part of this could be automated? And then you get back maybe 4 hours to your day to go do something way more interesting than that task that used to take you 4 hours to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just doing something as basic as a journaling exercise and if you can just get back to something like that where you do a little bit of daily meditation and start thinking about where the pressure points are, where are you getting stressed? And then thinking through, well, gosh, if I were to use AI, could I release some of that stress? I think that would just lead to a more fulfilling outcome.
Yeah, I would like to be less stressed at work. So that would be so
Wouldn't we
nice.
all?
It would be so nice for me. It'd be nice to wake up not at a stress 10 out of 10 every day. But this has been such a helpful and interesting conversation. I think this will really help people start to think critically about what we as HR can do to help make ourselves make better decisions, but also teach our leaders about how to make better decisions. Because I think that judgment piece, calling all the way back to, you mentioned judgment at the very beginning of our conversation. I think like judgment is going to become a new currency at work where we're going to really look at people and be like, do they have good judgment? Yes or no? And that
Yeah.
could tell you everything about what their future career looks like. So I was so excited to have this conversation. Thank you. I took notes the whole time too. So I have like a million things to go geek out about afterwards.
Well, and just by you saying that, it's giving more value to my liberal arts undergraduate education. I'm kind of like, yeah, like I got learned pretty well how to do some critical thinking there. So
Same, same.
there's there's some value in that.
People always ask like how I became the thinker I am. And I'm like, I wrote a lot of papers in college about,
That's right.
the concept of like war and violence in the international system. I was like a poli sci major, essentially
Yeah,
government and Middle Eastern studies. So I
yeah.
spent most of my day like critically thinking about something and asking myself why a million times, only to end up doing that as my job right now is what it feels like. So comes full circle.
It does. It does.
Amazing. Well, thank you for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Heba. I really enjoyed our conversation.